Welcome back. Today, I'm exposing to chilling incidents that hint at something beyond our world. One where a pilot lost 5 hours of her life with no memory, and another where scientists saw a massive geometric structure rise from the Mariana Trench before it vanished without a trace. These aren't rumors. These are documented anomalies that could change everything we know about time, space, and who's really in control of our planet. Before we dive in, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Let's get into it. They say the truth sleeps under ice. I used to believe that. Now I know it doesn't sleep. It waits. My name is Michael Renner, and for most of my adult life, I enforced silence. I wasn't a spy, not a soldier, just a mid-level investigator. For the FAA back in the 90s, my job was to make accidents disappear, at least on paper. I signed reports that never saw daylight and learned early on that some questions could get a man buried faster than a crash victim. For 30 years, I kept those questions locked away, until last winter, when an envelope slid through the slot of my Alaskan cabin door. No return address, no postmarked, just a thick manila packet that shouldn't exist. Inside was a single photograph, an FAA report stamped classified with a title I'd never seen before: Temporal Displacement Events. Civilian aircraft. Beneath it, a passenger manifest with one name circled in red ink. The paper smelled old, like stale archives and government vaults. My hands shook as I read the flight number: 739, Anchorage to Seattle, 1992. A case I'd been told to forget before I even understood it. They called it an instrumentation glitch back then, just a radar hiccup over the Gulf of Alaska. But I knew better. I always knew better. That flight vanished from every screen for 23 minutes. No distress calls, no debris, just gone, then back on course like nothing happened. Everyone on board claimed they remembered nothing. We closed the file under orders stamped with a phrase I'll never forget: defer to Dodd, classified under Blue Monarch protocol. I buried it like I was told, until now. The photo in the envelope wasn't what broke me, it was the name circled in red. When I zoomed in, my breath caught in my throat. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't some random passenger. It was my father. The night after that envelope arrived, I sat at my kitchen table with the report under a single bulb, listening to the wind drag itself across the cabin walls. The file was brittle, edges curled from decades in some drawer. Every page reeked of secrecy. The incident summary was cold. Stripped of humanity. Flight 739. Departure 6:42, Anchorage local. Lost radar contact. 7:18, reappeared 7:41. No recorded deviation, no casualties. That was it. No explanation, just a hole in time, 23 minutes, erased. The words that followed hit harder. All crew and passengers report no memory lapse. I remembered the day it crossed my desk. I was 32, barely breaking into the upper investigation ranks, eager to make a name. But when this case landed, something felt wrong from the start. The pressure came: quick calls from Washington, an unscheduled visit from two men who never gave their titles. They sat in my office like shadows, one speaking while the other stared at me like he could read my pulse. Defer to DOD. Blue Monarch protocol applies, the talker said. I'd never heard that phrase before. I asked once, just once, what it meant. His answer was a smile without warmth. It means you want to keep your career and your life. Within 48 hours, the digital logs were purged, every trace scrubbed, except for one thing I couldn't erase. The cockpit voice tape. I didn't turn it in. Couldn't. It's been buried for 30 years, in a box beneath floorboards no one's walked over but me. Tonight, I dug it out. A microcast, label faded to grey. I still had the player, though the batteries had leaked to powder. Took me an hour to rig a power feed. When I pressed play, my hands wouldn't stop trembling. At first, it was ordinary. Routine chatter between Captain Ward and his first officer, weather checks, altitude calls, a laugh about bad coffee. Then, 30 seconds before the gap, the tone shifted. Ward's voice, tight. "What the hell is that?" Static surged, drowning the words. Then something else, low and resonant, a hum, so deep it rattled through the speaker like it wasn't sound at all but pressure. For 12 seconds, nothing but that vibration. Then, a voice. Not English. Not anything I recognized. Just a single phrase in some language that felt wrong to hear, like it wasn't meant for human ears. Then silence. The tape ended there. By dawn, I couldn't ignore the name circled in red ore, the voice that didn't belong on that tape. My father had been dead for 15 years, a quiet man who worked maintenance for the railroad, or so I thought. He never mentioned flying, never spoke of Alaska. Yet there he was, on Flight 739's passenger list, Seat 18C, the same flight I was ordered to bury. That was the crack that split everything wide open. I started with the passenger logs I could still access. Most of the names were dead ends, married couples, business travelers, military leave papers scrubbed from public record. But one name jumped out. Dana Harlow. She was 28 then, a schoolteacher from Spokane. The only reason I found her was a court document buried in a civil claim she'd filed for disability in 1997, citing persistent neurological trauma related to unverified aviation event. That phrase was like a beacon. Finding her wasn't hard. She lived 2 states over, in a house sagging under years of neglect. When she opened the door, I almost didn't recognize her from the DMV photo. Her hair had gone grey early, and her hands trembled as she gripped the frame. I introduced myself, careful with the truth. "I'm looking into old FAA cases," I said. "Flight 739. Her eyes went glassy. She tried to shut the door. I caught it gently, promised her off-record confidentiality. For a long moment, she stared past me like I wasn't there. Then she whispered, I wasn't supposed to remember. Inside, the living room smelled of dust and old books. She moved like someone carrying too much history. When I asked what she meant, she pulled out a shoebox of cassette tapes, therapy sessions. She explained hypnosis, nightmares she couldn't shake. Her voice on those tapes was younger but already fractured. I listened to one while she sat, silent, twisting a handkerchief in her lap. Session 4, March 1995. I'm in a room. Metallic, cold, no windows. There's light, but I can't find where it comes from. They're here tall, thin. Too tall, 7, 8 feet. Skin like silver glass. Eyes, black. No whites, just endless. Her breath hitched on the tape. They bend me forward. Something at my spine pressure, burning. I can't move. I can't even scream. One of them says something inside my head, not out loud. For words, prepare them. Cycle complete. Then, nothing. The session ended with her screaming a sound that didn't feel human. I flipped through the therapist's notes, pages of clinical detail, until the last entry. It cut off mid-sentence. The final page was gone. I drove back through the rain with Dana's voice looping in my head, those 4 words like a code etched into bone. Prepare them, cycle complete. I kept hearing the scrape in her tone when she said, burning at the spine. It matched the autopsy fragment I'd glimpsed in Vesk's file years ago. During another case, micro-lesions along the spinal cord. Different context. Same injury. By the time I reached the cabin, paranoia had set in like frost. I pulled the blinds, locked the door twice, and spread the passenger manifest across the table. 58 names. I started digging. Within 2 hours, the pattern emerged. 7 passengers, including Dano, surfaced years later in obscure medical trials, all backed by front companies tied to DARPA grants. The studies sounded harmless on paper. Neural resilience, adaptive cognitive frameworks, but the timelines overlapped too neatly. Each participant had been on Flight 739. I pulled credit records, employment histories. Every one of the 7 had at least one random audit flagged by federal agencies in the decades after the flight. Some had gaps in their tax filings, entire years wiped clean, as if they didn't exist. And then there were the travel anomalies. Multiple security clearance checks for people with no government jobs. They weren't living normal lives. They were being monitored, controlled. I called an old contact, someone who'd worn the same badge as me, once. His name was Dwyer, and he owed me for burying a drinking incident that could have ended his career. He picked up on the second ring. Voice flat. Renner. Jesus, I thought you were dead. Need to ask you about Monarch, I said. Silence stretched like wire. Then a low laugh, humorless. You really don't quit, do you? He murmured. Listen to me. That protocol. It never ended. And if you've touched it, they already know. They a click. Deadline. I sat there, pulse thudding in my ears, staring at the phone until the screen dimmed. That's when my laptop chimed a motion alert from the security cam in my home. Office. The footage loaded slow on my cracked screen. Grainy black and white, but clear enough. A figure inside my house. Calm, precise. No mask, no hurry. He moved like he belonged there. The feed glitched. When it cleared, the room was empty. Everything looked untouched, except for one detail. The shoebox of cassettes sat on the desk, but the microcassette from Flight 739 was gone. I didn't sleep. That night, couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that grainy figure slipping through my house like a ghost that didn't need doors. The microcassette was gone, and with it, the last unfiltered truth I had. I needed leverage, something. They hadn't scrubbed yet. And then I remembered a meeting from 30 years ago, one I'd buried so deep I almost convinced myself it never happened. It was late summer of '93, a sterile FAA conference room in DC, blinds drawn against a sweltering afternoon. Been called in with 2 others, both civilian liaisons, by a consultant from Lockheed Martin. His badge read S. Calhoun, though something in his posture said that wasn't his real name. He had the look of a man used to sealed doors and windowless hallways. Calhoun spoke in a voice as flat as his grey suit. Gentlemen, what I'm about to show you is not for circulation outside this room. He opened a slim case and slid a glossy photo across the table. I remember staring at it so hard, my vision pulsed. It was a diagram, not a drawing too organic for that. It showed something curved, like a section of spine, threaded with metallic filaments finer than hair. Labels marked connection points, all annotated in dense technical jargon. At the bottom, in neat block letters, spinal node prototype, Gen 3, monarch adaptation. I asked what it was. Calhoun didn't blink. Biological processor, he said. Neural integration device. We believe it merges with host tissue. Host, I repeated, tasting the word like poison. Recovered material, he added casually, as if we were talking about alloy samples. Your job isn't the origin story. It's making sure no civilian incident compromises containment. Fail logs, radar gaps, cockpit chatter, all of it disappears. Because if the public knew what was being tested, he let the sentence die, but the weight of it filled the room. I asked the only question that mattered. Tested where? Calhoun's smile was thin as paper. Anywhere it needs to be. That was 30 years ago. Now, staring at that memory, under the sick glow of my desk lamp, the truth hit like altitude sickness. The implants Dana described weren't random horrors, they were part of a program. The flight wasn't a target of opportunity. It was a delivery system. I powered up. An encrypted account I hadn't touched since '96. It was dead. Except for one new message. No subject line, no sender trace. Just 2 words in all caps. Stop now, and an attachment. I clicked before I could think. The photo filled my screen in washed-out color. A burned-out sedan on the shoulder of a desert highway. Flames still licking the frame. Inside, slumped against the shattered driver's window, was a man I knew. Agent Keller, the one name I swore would never resurface. The image of Keller's car burned in my mind long after I closed the laptop. Keller wasn't just a name in the... Margency was the man who first whispered the word monarch into my ear during a bourbon-soaked night in an Arlington bar. If someone torched him, then the circle was closing, and I was standing dead center. I drove through the night, hugging back roads, headlights carving pale tunnels through the snowstorm rolling in from the Arctic shelf. Destination, Denver International. Wasn't far, but my gut said to bypass it. Too obvious. Instead, I aimed for an old contact in Colorado, retired NORAD technician named Alan Crowley, who owed me more than one favor. Last I heard, he was living like a ghost in the outskirts of Denver. A man who saw too much Cold War paranoia calcify into classified reality. I found him in a diner off Route 36, hunched over a chipped mug, eyes darting like a man expecting company. He didn't flinch when I slid into the booth. "You look like hell," he said. "Compliments later. Tell me about Flight 739. The words drained the color from his face. He glanced around, then leaned in. "You shouldn't even know that." "Number? I don't have time for games, Alan." He hesitated, then whispered, "We tracked it that night. At NORAD, didn't show on civilian scopes, but we saw it vanish. Not a transponder fatally gone." Then he paused, breath fogging between us ghost pings. I frowned, meaning we had radar returns from something moving at impossible velocities. Non-inertial movement, Mike. Instant acceleration. Physics says no. That night says otherwise. I felt my stomach dip. "You think it was them?" His eyes hardened. "I think the Air Force wasn't alone that night. And if you're digging this deep, you're already in their crosshairs." He reached into his coat and slid a small sealed vial across the table. Inside was dark fluid, almost black in the dim light. "What the hell is this?" "Blood," he said, "from an internal sample vault. Pulled it before they locked me out. DNA tag matches one of the passengers." His voice dropped. The one circled in red. My throat closed. "My father," Alan didn't look surprised. They've been monitoring your bloodline for years. That's why they left you breathing after Monarch went dark. You were never out of the program. Before I could respond, the bell over the diner door jingled. 2 men in black coats stepped in, scanning the room with predatory calm. Alan's grip tightened on my arm. "Run," he whispered, "and for God's sake, don't trust anyone." I grabbed the vial and bolted through the kitchen exit into the frozen night. Tires screeched behind me as I gunned the engine of my truck, heart pounding. In the rear view, headlights bloomed like eyes. They had found me by the time I lost the black SUV in the foothills. My hands were numb on the steering wheel and my head throbbed with questions I couldn't outrun. Alan was gone, maybe dead, and all I had to show for it was a blood vial that felt heavier than lead in my pocket. My father's blood, proof of something I didn't yet understand but couldn't ignore. I parked the truck in a motel lot off E25 and powered up my burner laptop. There was only one person I trusted enough to pull into this mess, Rachel Stone. We'd worked together at the FAA during the mid-90s. She was sharp, fearless, and one of the few who hadn't flinched when the Monarch file crossed her desk. Back then, she'd warned me to walk away. I didn't listen. Now I needed her. She answered on the second ring, her voice taut. "Mike, Jesus, it's been years. I need a secure meet," I said. "Tonight." We met in a corner booth of an all-night diner outside Boulder, the kind of place where the coffee tastes like burnt rubber and the jukebox hasn't worked since Reagan. She slid into the booth in a grey parka, eyes scanning the room before settling on me. "No hug, no small talk. You look like someone lit your life on fire," she said quietly. "They're killing anyone tied to Monarch," I whispered. "Keller's dead. Crowley too, maybe. And I have something they'll kill for." I tapped the vial in my pocket. Rachel leaned in. "What is it?" "Blood. From Flight 739. From my father." Saying it out loud made the air feel thinner. Her eyes widened, then softened. "Mike, you can't carry this alone. Let me help." For the first time in days, I felt a flicker of relief. She still had that steel in her voice, that calm edge that used to ground me. We spent an hour drafting an upload plan and dead drops, scheduled releases to multiple outlets. If I disappeared, the files would surface. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. When I stepped into the restroom to splash water on my face, I left my laptop on the table. I came back to find Rachel hunched over it, a flash drive glinting in her hand. "What are you doing?" My voice cracked like a whip. She froze, then straightened slowly. "Back up, for security." "Bullshit." My gaze darted to her phone. The call log was still on screen, last, outgoing to a DoD liaison number I knew too well. "Rachel." My throat felt like glass. "Why?" Her eyes shimmered, a war between guilt and resolve. "Because I thought I could keep you alive." I didn't answer. Couldn't. When I woke the next morning in my motel, she was gone. So was my laptop. All she left was a folded note on the nightstand. "I tried to protect you. They're coming. Rachel's." Note sat like a weight in my chest as I drove south, mile markers blurring past in the dark. The words weren't a warning, they were a countdown. If she handed them my name, they'd already be triangulating my position. Every instinct screamed to disappear, but I wasn't built for running blind. If Rachel was working with them, then maybe she led me to the one place they never wanted me to see. 2 days later, A burner phone pinged with a signal trace. Her device. Last active, near Tonopah, Test Range, Nevada. Deep desert. A graveyard for Cold War secrets. I knew the place from whispered FAA briefings, black budget projects. Unmarked runways. Hangars that swallowed entire airframes. If Monarch lived anywhere, it was in the silence between those fences. I ditched my truck 100 miles out and hitched the rest in the back of a supply rig, cash buying the driver's silence. By dusk, I was crouched behind a berm of red earth, staring at a perimeter fence pulsing with motion sensors. Beyond it, floodlights, blast-proof doors, and a flat expanse that looked empty until the earth swallowed a convoy whole. An access hatch, big enough for semis, irised shut like a mechanical eyelid. I waited for nightfall, then moved. The desert cold cut like glass as I crawled to a maintenance culvert. Its great bore stenciled codes I recognized from FAA hazard reports, only these weren't drainage specs. They were entry designations. Someone had disguised an artery under the skin of the range. The shaft dumped me into a corridor humming with recycled air, white walls, seamless panels, no signage except for symbols carved into metal plates, geometric, looping forms like the ones from Dana's hypnosis sketches. The hum deepened as I moved inward, passing doors with biometric locks and cameras that tracked but didn't sound alarms, almost like they expected me. Then I saw the first chamber. Rows of pods lined the room like coffins for giants, each one backlit with a sterile glow. Inside, human silhouettes lay motionless, skin pale under frost glass. Thin conduits snaked from their spines into ports studding the pod walls. Surgical scars traced their vertebrae like railroad tracks. I counted 20 before the bile rose in my throat. Asterisk. Footsteps echoed, heavy, synchronized. I ducked behind a console stacked with equipment slim devices, each tagged with a phrase I couldn't unread. Cognitive mesh, Monarch, Phase 4, a klaxon blared. Red lights strobed as boots hammered closer. I bolted, weaving through corridors, until I hit a side lab and slammed the door. My eyes fell on a table cluttered with instruments and a single object small enough to hide in my fist. A spinal implant prototype, cold and slick as glass. I pocketed it just as an explosion ripped the air outside. When I hit the desert night, again, flames licked the sky and my car detonated before I touched the door handle. They weren't letting me leave alive after Tonopah. I drove north like a fugitive, steering into the kind of places where the road vanishes and the map stops. Caring. The prototype sat in my coat pocket, its surface unnervingly warm, as if pulsing with a heartbeat. I didn't dare examine it in daylight. Every tower, every lens could be watching. 2 days later, I hit Barrow, Alaska town clinging to the edge of the frozen earth like a secret someone forgot to erase. Why Barrow? Because of a memo Crowley once hinted at. VLF, anomalized, persistent, unacknowledged Barrow quadrant. Very low frequency pulses, he said, repeating in cycles. No natural process could mimic. Back then, I filed it under Cold War paranoia. Now, I wasn't so sure. The station logs I lifted from an old NOIA server confirmed it for decades. Barrow had been a choke point for something broadcasting under the ice. The signal wasn't random. It was structured, a carrier tone piggybacking on deep earth resonance bands, strong enough to rattle steel at the molecular level, and the cycle was accelerating. Locals didn't talk much, but a man running a snowcat rental cracked after 2 bourbons. He said the hum had started again last week, a sound that crawls in your teeth. He pointed me toward an old military ice tunnel system west of town, abandoned since the 60s. That's where I went. The Arctic night wrapped around me like black glass as I followed the tunnel's mouth into the glacier. The air smelled of mineral frost and oil ghosts from decades past. My headlamp carved an anemic cone through the dark, bouncing off steel ribs crusted with rime. Half a mile in, I heard it. A low vibration that wasn't sound so much as pressure, pressing into my bones. My fillings ached. The hum thickened with every step until my knees trembled like tuning forks. And then the tunnel ended. The cavern was a wound in the ice, jagged and raw. At its center, buried in frozen blue, was something the size of a rail car curved, metallic, but softer than any alloy I knew. Its surface shimmered faintly, not with light, but with the suggestion of it, like heat mirage trapped under glass. The sound came from their no, through their rippling out in pulses that seemed to sync with my heartbeat until I couldn't tell which rhythm was mine. I edged closer. My breath plumed white against the hull, and that's when it hit words. Not spoken, but slammed into my skull like a hammer wrapped in silk. Prepare them, cycle complete. I staggered back, clutching my head as the hum cut off, leaving the silence, screaming. Then came a hiss. The ice shifted. A seam split across the craft surface, spilling pale light into the cavern like an open wound. And something inside began to move. When the seam split, I froze. The glow spilling from inside wasn't light in the ordinary sense. It had weight, like it pressed against the air and bent it. For a moment, the cavern felt smaller, as if the ice itself was pulling inward. Then the hum returned, softer this time, almost coaxing. I should have run, every instinct screamed it. But I stepped closer. The hull's inner skin pulsed like muscle under glass, patterned with veins of something that looked alive. And in the center, nested like an organ in a chest cavity, was a lattice of black filaments suspended in pale fluid. The threads shifted, in slow, deliberate waves, forming shapes that collapsed before my eyes could lock them. I don't know how long I stared before I realized what it was. A network. Not mechanical, not biological, both. A cognitive mesh. I'd seen something like it in Lockheed's diagram decades ago. Labeled Neural Integration Framework, Phase 2. Only this wasn't a prototype. This was the source. The hum spiked. For a split second, the ice tunnel behind me flickered, yes, flickered, like reality stuttered. And then I saw them. Not figures, not bodies outlines of intention, tall and thin, bending where no joints should exist. They weren't in the room. They were through it, projected or present in a way my brain couldn't pass. Words slammed into my skull again. This time layered, the grid expands. Nodes align. Cycle advances. My chest seized with a cold beyond the Arctic. And that's when I understood. The implants, the spinal nodes, were never standalone tech. They were keys, living interfaces, designed to lock humanity into something vast. A planetary mesh built from minds, not machines. Every abductee, every altered passenger was a node in that lattice. The sound faded as the outlines receded, dissolving like smoke in a vacuum. The seams sealed shut, and the glow died as if it had never existed. All that remained was the silence and the certainty that I was standing on the edge of an activation event. I stumbled back through the tunnel, boots slipping on frost, lungs clawing for air. At the surface, the night sky churned with auroras that pulsed in rhythm, with the hum still echoing in my skull. It wasn't random, it was a heartbeat. And the world, whether it knew or not, was syncing to it. When I reached the truck, my phone buzzed with a single notification on an encrypted channel I hadn't touched since the FAA days. A message from an untraceable node. You saw it, now you know what's coming. The message burned on my screen like a brand. You saw it, now you know what's coming. For the first time since this started, I believed those words weren't a threat, they were a statement of fact. I drove south for 2 days, whiteouts chasing me through the Yukon until the road spat me into Vancouver. From there, I caught a red-eye to DC under an alias that would last maybe 12 hours. I wasn't running anymore. I needed answers, and the only way to get them was to knock on a door no sane man would touch. Keller's handler, I'd met him once in a Pentagon sublevel that smelled of copper and fear. Back then, he called himself Laird. Probably not his real name, but names didn't matter in that orbit. What mattered was leveraging. I had some now. The implant prototype sat in a lead-lined pouch inside my coat. I didn't know what it could do, but I knew what it meant. Proof they couldn't deny. I found him in a glass tower across from the Potomac, posing as an exec for an aerospace consultancy. His office was minimalist, no family photos, just a single painting of storm clouds over an empty runway. When he saw me, his expression didn't twitch. He poured 2 glasses of bourbon like we were old friends. You look tired, Mike, he said softly. Barrow will do that to a man. That sentence landed like a scalpel. He knew where I'd been. He knew everything. What is it? I asked. What's the endgame? He swirled his drink, gaze distant. You think this is an invasion? It's not. It's a negotiation. We give them stability, compliance, structure, control. They give us technology that rewrites the limits of existence. Everyone wins. Everyone. My voice cracked. Everyone that matters, he said. You think wars, pandemics, economic collapse are random. They're tests, stress events, modeling scenarios for grid integration. Humanity is a volatile system, Mike. They want order. We want progress. This, he gestured vaguely toward the world outside, is the cost of admission, and the implants I forced out. His smile was almost kind. You've seen a neural network, haven't you? Each node makes the system stronger, smarter. That's what they're building through us. With us. The Monarch program was phase 1. I gripped the implant pouch so hard my knuckles burned. And if we refuse? Laird's eyes locked on mine, flat and endless. Refusal isn't an option. The activation sequence is already in motion. He slid a folder across the table. The top page was a list of names, thousands of them near the bottom. My father's name was checked, and next to it, in red ink, was mine. I left Laird's office with the folder burning a hole in my jacket. Thousands of names, pilots, passengers, random civilians, none of it random. Each marked for something they'd dressed up as integration. I was on the list. So was my father. Back at the motel, I spread the pages across the bed. Patterns emerged like bruises, clusters near major airports, Arctic supply routes, naval corridors, places I once thought were choke points for trade. They weren't. They were collection zones. Every vanishing aircraft, every radar in a choreography I'd been too blind to see. My burner buzzed with alerts before I could process it all. News feeds erupting with chaos. A technical outage grounded half the commercial flights across North America. European ATC systems suffered a cascade failure. Social platforms drowned in hashtags, hashtag black sky, hashtag grid down. Live videos showed airliners vanishing from a DSB maps, reappearing minutes later hundreds of miles off course. The same pattern as Flight 739. The official narrative moved fast, faster than truth ever could. Government spokespeople smiled on every network, calling it a satellite sync anomaly. Influencers parroted scripted lines about solar flares and benign glitches. Hashtags flipped overnight from panic to memes. Disinformation wasn't just a shield, it was a flood. Anyone asking real questions was branded a crank before sunrise. I watched as the media storm spread like wildfire, smothering the signal under noise. Behind the noise, the numbers climbed. 37 aircraft globally in the last 12 hours, with blackout gaps between 3 and 25 minutes, and buried in an FAA NOTAM I still had access to. A single red line advisory. All anomalies flagged Blue Monarch for central review. Defer escalation to DoD chain. Monarch, still alive, still moving pieces. I tried to push the story to my dead network journalists I trusted once, but every message bounced. Accounts purged. Gateways dead. It was like the internet had grown teeth. When I rerouted through offshore relays, a new message blinked on my screen. Michael, you can't outrun what's inside you. I stared at the words until my vision blurred. They didn't need to chase me. They didn't even need Rachel to betray me. If Laird was right, they'd already wired the board decades ago. The TV in the corner crackled with another briefing. Same calm voice, same hollow reassurances. But under the ticker, something else scrolled, a sequence of numbers, looping in a way only someone like me would notice. It wasn't random. It was a countdown. The countdown burned into my retinas. A string of numbers pulsing under the news ticker like a secret whispered in plain sight. 48 hours. That's what it translated to, 48 hours, until something irreversible. I didn't have time to guess. I needed someone who'd give me the truth straight, without the corporate polish Laird wrapped around his lies. There was only one person left who could. The handler Keller reported to the man who'd recruited us both during the FAA cleanups. I found him in a retirement villa outside Langley, a glass and concrete mausoleum for ghosts of the deep state. He was older now, skin like parchment, but his eyes still cut like wire. He didn't seem surprised to see me. "You lasted longer than Keller," he said, voice like gravel. "Sit." I didn't. "Tell me what the countdown means." He studied me for a long moment, then sighed. "You think this is about control, about power. It's not. It's about survival." "Whose survival?" I asked. "Everyone's," he said flatly. "We've been in contact since '52. Call them whatever you want. Visitors, custodians, predators. They made it simple. Adapt or vanish. This planet isn't theirs yet, but it will be unless we make it useful to them. The grid isn't an invasion. It's assimilation." I felt the floor tilt. "You're saying we volunteered for this?" He laughed, a sound brittle as glass. "Volunteered. We negotiated. They wanted autonomy over selection. We said no, so they compromised. We choose who becomes a node. Pilots, frequent flyers, remote populations, the people no one misses when they blink out for 20 minutes. Each implant strengthens the lattice, and when it's complete," his voice trailed off. "When it's complete what?" "They say there's no pain," he murmured. "That when activation comes, We'll be part of something greater. A single cognitive organism spanning every host. No war, no hunger, just silence where chaos used to live. I stared at him, bile rising. And you believed them? I didn't have to, he said, leaning back. I saw what happens when they take without consent. Whole villages gone. Aircraft turned inside out, mid-air. You think extinction's better. This is mercy, Renner. Managed compliance. A seat at the table. I slammed the implant prototype on his desk. You mean this? His eyes flicked to it, and for the first time, fear cracked his calm. You shouldn't have that, he whispered. They'll kill for it. They already have, I said. Now tell me how to stop this. He shook his head slowly. You can't stop it. The sequence is locked. The grid is waking. I left the villa with his words echoing like a death sentence. The grid is waking. Outside, the air smelled of rain and diesel. But beneath that was something else, something metallic, sharp enough to taste. Maybe it was my nerves, or maybe it was real. Back in the rental car, I opened the folder again. The list of names blurred. As I scanned it, my father's among them. But now something new appeared in the pattern. Time stumps. They weren't arbitrary, they matched the ticker countdown from the broadcast. 48 hours had become 22, and the final entry wasn't a date. It was a signal frequency, 17.4 hertz. Very low frequency, the same pulse I heard under the ice. The Arctic craft wasn't dormant. It was the transmitter. Activation wasn't a flip of a switch. It was a global resonance event. Every implant, every node, humming in sync until the human grid lit up like a neural superstructure. Once it linked, there'd be no reversing it. I drove until the city lights bled out behind me, pulled over on a gravel shoulder, and powered up the secure sat phone I swore I'd never use. Only one call mattered now. Rachel answered on the first. Ring. Her voice was thin, frayed. You shouldn't be calling me. Then hang up, I said. But if you ever cared about anything, lesson activations in less than a day. Silence stretched like wire. Then, I know. My grip tightened. You what? I thought I could stop it from inside, she said. But this isn't ours anymore, Mike. We're just maintenance now. Where's the control hub? I demanded, a long exhale. Cold War relay bunker in the Rockies. Converted for Phase 4. That's where they'll amplify the signal. Coordinates. She hesitated, then rattled them off like a confession. Before I could thank her, the line clicked dead. I stared at the mountains jagged against the night sky. The road ahead, nothing but black glass under a bone-white moon. Somewhere in that dark spine was the switch that would end a sore turn us into something unrecognizable. My phone buzzed again. A text. No number, just 6 words. EMP failsafe still exists. One shot. I didn't know if it was Rachel or a ghost in the system, but I knew this. Tomorrow wasn't about exposing the truth. It was about cutting the cord before the hum in my skull became permanent. I put the car in gear. Time was bleeding out, and the mountains were waiting. The road to the Rockies was a thread of black ice twisting through jagged teeth of stone. Every mile chewed at the clock, the countdown etched in my head like a drumbeat. When I finally reached the access road Rachel had given me, dawn was just bleeding into the sky, a thin scarlet line, stretching across the horizon like a warning. The bunker sat buried in a slope of granite, disguised as a weather station. Its surface looked dead, no movement, no sound, but when I cut the engine and killed the lights, I felt it. A vibration in the earth, faint but steady, pulsing like a heartbeat. The frequency was climbing. I packed light, the implant prototype in my coat, the EMP charge slung across my back. Crowley had mentioned a failsafe once, in a whisper, a relic of Cold War paranoia wired into every deep facility. Crude, untested, but if it still worked, it would fry everything inside this mountain, including me. Inside, the air was antiseptic, humming with the rhythm I'd felt outside. Corridors stretched like veins under fluorescent veins of light. I moved fast, following signs stenciled in codes only FAA spooks would know until I reached the core chamber. The room was cathedral high, a hollow carved from bedrock. At its center towered a structure that made the Arctic craft look primitive. Spire of glass and metal threaded with conduits glowing like arteries. Around it stood rows of consoles manned by figures in Black Ops gear, their faces ghostly in the sterile light. Above them, an array of screens bloomed with maps, telemetry, and, God help me, human silhouettes. Thousands of them, nodes, lighting up across continents like cities from orbit. Laird stood at the base of the spire, flanked by technicians moving with surgical precision. He saw me, and for the first time, his calm cracked. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "You're turning us into a circuit," I snapped. "A living grid." His voice was almost gentle. "We're saving you from extinction. The activation completes in 20 minutes. After that, you'll thank us." "No," I said, pulling the EMP rig free. "After that, there won't be an us." The moment he saw it, the room erupted. Shouts, footsteps hammering metal decks. But I was already running, vaulting a console as alarms howled like wolves. A shot rang out, sparks spit from the wall inches from my head. I hit the spires, base, and slammed the charge against a junction panel. The magnets locked with a metallic clack. My thumb hovered over the arming switch. One press, and the pulse would tear through the grid-shatter implants, fry circuits, and maybe kill anyone wired into the system. Thousands of lives on my hands. Then I saw it on the nearest screen. The activation index climbing 95%, 96%, a name blinking on the roster. My father's, alive, still linked. My chest caved in. If I triggered it, I'd kill him. If I didn't, I'd lose him to something that wasn't human. Laird's voice boomed over the alarms. "Think, Michael. Flip that switch and you cripple every node. They won't die, they'll tear themselves apart." I stared at the detonator, fingers slick with sweat, the hum in my skull now a roar. And then I pressed it. The lights died. The hum collapsed into silence, so pure it rang in my teeth. Then came the sound, 1,000 circuits screaming as the grid unraveled. When I opened my eyes, the spire was dark, dead. Smoke curled like ghosts from its shattered veins. But then, from somewhere deep in the mountain, a low pulse shuddered through the stone, slow, patient, like a heartbeat that refused to stop. When the blast faded, silence pressed against my skull like a weight. The bunker reeked of ozone and burned circuitry. The spire lay in ruins, glass ribs collapsed, conduits hissing like punctured veins. The hum was gone. For the first time in days, my head felt empty. I staggered through smoke toward the exit, lungs clawing for air. Bodies lay sprawled among shattered consoles, their faces slack, not dead, just offline, like someone pulled the plug. Maybe that included me. The EMP had rolled through my nerves, like a tidal wave, leaving everything numb. I half expected to wake up in another sterile chamber with silver-skinned giants leaning over me outside. The dawn cut the peaks in molten gold. Wind scraped over stone, carrying nothing but the hiss of melting frost. No black SUVs, no men with needles, just mountains, indifferent as ever. I dropped on a rock and checked the sat phone. No signal, no news. The world wasn't burning yet. Least, not yet. I dug into my coat for the implant prototype, but the pouch was empty. Somewhere between the blast and the smoke, it vanished. Whether it disintegrated or someone walked it out under the chaos, I'll never know. For a moment, hope flickered. Maybe I'd done it. Maybe I'd severed the grid before the lattice locked. But that pulse, I can't forget it. That slow, patient throb from deep in the mountain. Machines don't heal themselves. But this wasn't a machine. It was something older, smarter, waiting. I hiked down the ridge until I hit the road, boots crunching on frost like breaking glass. A trucker gave me a lift to a truck stop off I-70, where I paid cash for a burner and a bus ticket east. By the time the sun dipped, I was gone against another grey face in a crowd of strangers staring at their screens, oblivious to how close we came to vanishing. Now I sit in a rented room 3 states away, writing this confession on paper because circuits can't be trusted. When I'm done, I'll seal it, leave it where someone will find it when I'm ash. If this ever reaches you, know this. The truth isn't buried in the Arctic or sealed in a bunker. It's inside us, in the code threaded through our nerves, by hands we'll never shake. I stopped one activation. I didn't stop the design dot just now. My phone never turned on. Battery pulled lit up by itself. One line on the screen, pulsing like a heartbeat. Signal reacquired. I looked out the window. The sky was darkening, clouds stretched thin like gauze. And high above, against the bruised blue, something shimmered. A disk, faint, like a coin held up to the sun. Watching dot, round 1 is over. Asterisk. The ocean never forgets what you've buried in it. I learned that the hard way. I used to believe I'd left that life behind. After 12 years with the Navy, most of it spent in deep-sea operations, I traded steel corridors for lecture halls, teaching marine geology to restless undergrads in Washington. DC, it was quiet work, predictable, and that's exactly why I chose it. But some secrets don't stay submerged forever. It began on a wet November evening in 2023. I had just finished GRADING papers when a padded envelope slid through my office door. No return address, just my name in block letters. Inside was a flash drive, unmarked but heavy in my hand like a confession. I locked the door before plugging it in. The file was a single video, sonar footage. Time-stamped May 2011. My chest tightened. That was the year of the diver mission no one spoke of, not even in whispers. The feed showed a sweep of the Mariana Trench, the screen flickering with static before resolving into 3 shapes. Massive and cold, gliding across the seabed at 36,000 feet. They moved at impossible speed for 100 knots and yet the water around them was calm. I felt the old ache in my temples, the one that always came when memory and fear collided. Halfway through, the video glitched for a fraction of a second. The darkness bloomed with lighter lattice of bioluminescent lines, too structured for nature, too vast for any vessel I knew. It looked like a city grid, pulsing faintly against the abyss. Then the image froze, and words bled across the frame in pale red letters. ABYSS. Protocol engaged. I leaned back, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Abyss, protocol. I hadn't seen those words in over a decade, not since the night we lost contact with dive team, Bravo, and my brother along with them. I stared at the screen long after it went black, a single thought looping in my head. Someone wanted me to remember what I've spent 12 years trying to forget, and then the power in my office flickered. Once, twice, and died when the lights came back on. The monitor was blank, like nothing had ever played. The flash drive felt warm in my hand, too warm for an idle piece of metal. I slipped it into my pocket and left the campus before anyone could ask why their professor looked like he'd seen a ghost. Back home, I loaded the file on a secured laptop. I hadn't touched since 2016. This time, I went deeper into the metadata. Most of it was wiped clean, but one string survived. Navaran 201177. It didn't take long to recognize the format. A Navy anomaly report. I knew the archive once held thousands of them until a purge swept the servers 2 years ago. Whatever this was, someone had missed a breadcrumb. I should have stopped, closed the laptop, pretended it never happened. But instead, I picked up my phone and called Emily Reyes. We'd worked together on a hydrothermal vent mapping project back in 2013 before. She traded academia for investigative journalism. If anyone could trace a dead file through classified shadows, it was her. She answered on the third ring, her voice sharp, alert. I barely got 2 sentences out before she cut in. Send me the hash code. I'll see what's buried under it. I did, hands trembling slightly as I hit send. We were 3 minutes into the call when it happened. A third voice slid into the line, calm and mechanical. Stop digging, Dr. Carter. No distortion, no static, just a cold certainty that someone was listening. Then silence. Emily broke it first. Alex, what the hell was that? I didn't answer because I couldn't. My pulse hammered in my throat as I stared at the window, half expecting a rifle scope glint. I hung up and killed the phone. That night, I barely slept. Every sound outside my townhouse felt amplified. The hum of a distant car engine, a dog barking 3 streets over. At 4:12 a.m., I gave up on rest and opened the blinds. The street was empty. Or so I thought. On the porch lay an envelope. No markings. Inside was a single photograph, a deep-sea drone shot of an archway 7 miles underwater, glowing like molten glass. Across the back, written in ink so faint it almost vanished under the porch light, were 2 words. Go deeper. I stared at that photograph until the sun came up, tracing the archway's outline with my thumb. It wasn't natural, no way. Basalt folds itself into a perfect curve and glows like a forge in the coldest part of the planet. My first instinct was to call Emily again, but the phone was gone. Not misplaced, gone. The table where I'd left it was bare. By noon, the smears started. An article online with my name attached. Professor under investigation for data fabrication. A blog post claiming I'd harassed a student. It spread fast, bleeding into forums and social media. I didn't need a signature to know whose fingerprints were on it. Only Office of Naval Intelligence. They'd done this before. Silence the source by destroying the credibility first. At 3 p.m., my university email froze. Access denied. Years of research gone in a blink. A neat way of amputating my professional life. I packed a bag, cash only, and left the townhouse before nightfall. My gut told me I wouldn't be coming back. Emily called from a burner line. She sounded winded, like she'd been running. "Your file's not in the system anymore," she said. "But I found something. A codey name tied to Navernum. Minus 2011 minus 77. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles went white. "What name?" "Abyss Protocol." The words hit me like a wave. I hadn't heard them since that night in 2011, when the Cums died and the sea swallowed half my team, including my brother. I asked Emily how deep she could dig. She didn't answer immediately. When she did, her voice dropped to a whisper, deep enough to get us both killed. That was when I saw the black SUV parked across the street. Engine off, no plates. The driver didn't look up, didn't move, just waited. My apartment door was locked. I had checked twice, but when I turned, the laptop was open on the table. The flash drive, the only copy of the sonar footage, was gone. Through the blinds, the SUV's passenger door cracked open. A man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the kind of precision you only learn in uniform. He wasn't coming fast, just steady, deliberate, like time itself had slowed to match his stride. I didn't wait to see his face. I drove until the city lights vanished behind me, heading west with no destination, just distance. My mind clawed for options. Emily had gone dark. The SUV gone too. After 20 minutes of meandering through back roads, they weren't chasing, not yet. That scared me more than if they had been. At a rest stop off Route 50, I dug out an old contact from memory. Hank Morley, retired sonar operator, Pacific Fleet. We'd crossed paths during my Navy years, both of us logging impossible readings that vanished before we could verify them. If anyone would talk, it was Hank. If he wasn't already buried in a closed casket. Cover story: he lived in a trailer park outside Fredericksburg. When he opened the door, I barely recognized him. Thinner, grayer, but the same eyes that had once stared into abyssal charts without blinking. "Christ, Alex," he muttered, ushering me in. "You shouldn't be here." I laid the photograph on his kitchen table. The glowing archway, his face drained of color. He didn't touch it, just said, "You found one." "One what?" I pressed. Hank poured 2 fingers of bourbon into mismatched mugs and slid one to me. In 2011, before they scrubbed me out of the system, I monitored the trench anomaly. We heard them before we saw them, like the ocean was alive. He reached into a cabinet and returned with a warped metal tin. Inside were old storage cards, encrypted logs no one should have. He slid one across the table. "These are hydrophone captures. Frequencies so low they rattled ship hulls. The Navy called it noise. It wasn't. Those pulses," he hesitated, searching for the words. "They were patterned, intelligent, and they didn't stop in 2011. I pulled last week's satellite pings. Same signatures, louder this time." As the bourbon burned down my throat, Hank leaned closer. "They tried to make me forget, Alex. Pills, evaluations, the works. But some things stick." His voice cracked. "You think the ocean's empty. It's not. It's occupied." Before I could respond, Hank's landline rang a harsh old-school tone. He froze. "No one calls. This number." The ringing stopped. A click. Then static, followed by a sound that made my skin crawl. A deep, rhythmic pulse, echoing through the receiver like a heartbeat buried under miles of water. Hank slammed it down, trembling. Minutes later, my phone buzzed with a no sender, live feed. I opened it, A Navy ROV was descending into blackness. Lights cutting through nothing. Then static. Then screaming. The screaming didn't stop right away. It cut in and out through bursts of static, like voices underwater. Then silence so complete it felt alive. My thumb hovered over the screen, waiting for the feed to return. It never did. The link went dead. Hank stared at me, face pale and slick with sweat. There in the trench again, he whispered, almost to himself. And there, closer than before. I copied the feed's metadata before it vanished long coordinates in the middle of the Mariana. The depth tag read 36,071 feet. Same point we flagged in 2011. My chest tightened. That was where we lost Bravo, team where I lost Jacob. I called Emily from Hank's burner. She answered on the first ring. You still breathing? I asked. Barely. She shot back. Your Abyss protocol isn't a rumor. I broke into NOAA's deep archive. Cash, someone tried to bury this, but I found a thermal scan taken 3 months ago. You need to see it. Minutes later, my screen filled with something impossible. A false color image of the trench wall glowing with perfect symmetry. Not mineral, not tectonic. This was geometry. Lines forming nested fractals, spiraling into darkness like some alien. Cathedral etched into the seafloor. Emily's voice dropped. They've been drilling at those coordinates. Alex, commercial rigs under climate projects. But look at the fault data. They line up with the pulse signatures Hank found. If these things can manipulate stress points, they're not just passengers down there. They're drivers. Her words sank like lead. If the pulses aligned with tectonic plates, they could trigger seismic events anywhere, anytime. Earthquakes as tools, disasters as signals. I felt something inside me break open. Something I'd sealed off since 2011. Emily? My brother wasn't lost at sea, was he? My voice sounded foreign to my own ears. She hesitated. Alex, I don't think anyone was lost. A pause. I think they were taken. Before I could speak, a file pushed through on her end audio only, degraded but clear enough to carve into my brain forever. A man's voice, strained, filtered through rebreather static. It's not a structure, it's breathing. The file ended with a sound I'd heard once before on the cum line seconds before we lost contact 12 years ago. A low, harmonic pulse that seemed to vibrate in my teeth, even through the tinny speaker. Emily was still talking, but her words blurred under the weight of that sound. My hand shook as I closed the laptop and stared out Hank's cracked kitchen window at the night beyond. For the first time in years, I felt it rising again, the same pressure, the same primal sense that something vast and old was stirring below us. And this time, it wasn't asleep anymore. We left the East Coast under cover of a lie Emily arranged. It papers marking us as consultants for a private climate impact study on deep-sea methane vents. It was just credible enough to pass casual scrutiny. Our real destination sat in the middle of the Pacific, at a floating research platform funded by a billionaire who liked secrets almost as much as he liked publicity. He didn't ask questions because he already knew some of the answers. The submersible waiting for us wasn't military, but it was close. A titanium-hulled prototype rated for 40,000 feet. Pressure-resistant beyond anything I'd used in the Navy. The pilot, a gaunt Norwegian named Leanne, didn't bother with small talk. You've got 6 hours of breathable. After that, it's your problem. He gestured toward the sphere of reinforced acrylic where Emily and I would ride down to where light couldn't follow. At 0800, the The platform crane swung us out over steel-grey water and let go. The ocean swallowed us whole, the first 10,000 feet. Were routine if you can call the crushing weight of an entire world routine. Outside, bioluminescent life blinked like fallen stars. The hull groaned in slow, aching pulses as the pressure climbed. Emily kept her eyes on the monitors, logging everything with the precision of someone trying not to think about death pressing in from every angle at 20,000 feet. The sonar started lying. Shapes flickered on the display, huge, then gone. I'd seen false echoes before, but this was different. The noise had rhythm, like something moving just beyond the reach of certainty. "Fault in the array?" Emily asked, her voice tight. "No," I said. "Something's pacing us." She didn't answer. Neither did Leanne. 30 minutes later, the trench mouth opened. Below her, yawning absence more than a shape. The floodlights swept across rock walls, scarred with deep grooves, too smooth for erosion. Then I saw it. A dome loomed ahead, translucent, and pulsing with pale blue light, nested against the trench wall like an egg inside a socket. My breath hitched. It wasn't rock, it wasn't human, and it was alive. Emily pressed her face to the viewport, her voice barely a whisper. "Alex, that's not architecture." As if answering her, the light inside the dome quickened slow pulses, giving way to rapid beats, like a heart shifting into overdrive. The sub's controls trembled under Leanne's hands. "Navigation's not responding," he muttered, slamming manual overrides. "Something's pulling us in." On the monitor, a vector appeared, our trajectory bending without thrust, without physics that made sense. The dome was opening, not mechanically, but like a living organism peeling back layers to let us through. We crossed the threshold, and the world outside bloomed with corridors spiraling inward, veins of light tracing paths that led deeper, always deeper, and for the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to feel small enough to disappear. The dome swallowed us whole. Inside, there was no sense of scales, just endless walls of something that looked grown, not built. Leanne's hands shook on the controls as he fought a pull he couldn't see. Emily filmed everything, her camera trembling as much as I was. None of us spoke for several minutes. There was nothing to say when the sub finally stopped moving. It wasn't because Leanne regained control. It was because whatever drew us in had decided we'd gone far enough. We hung in a vast chamber, glowing, with a light that wasn't reflected but emitted, like the whole place breathed. Emily turned to me, eyes wide. "You realize what this means?" I nodded, but words felt useless. It wasn't just a structure, it was a system. Before I could answer, movement in the corner of my eye made my stomach drop. A dark silhouette shifted behind Emily's seat. The man from the black SUV, the one I thought I'd escaped him, merged from a crawl space near the sub's rear hatch. His face calm, unreadable. A sidearm gleamed in his grip. How Emily started. But he cut her off with a glance cold enough to kill speech. "Dr. Carter," he said evenly, "you were told to stop digging." His badge caught the light for half a second. "Only you planted the tracker," I muttered, remembering the tiny weight clipped to my gear. Emily's face flushed. She'd put it there, I realized, back on the surface. "Insurance," she whispered, her voice cracking. "They would have killed me otherwise." The words hit harder than the gun. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, because of the pressure outside, but because the trust I'd clung to shattered like thin glass. The only agent gestured to the hatch. we're leaving, both of you now. But then the light shifted. Every surface in that chamber brightened. Threads of luminescence pulsing in waves that converged on a single point ahead, a corridor opening where there had been only wall. The agent froze, his weapon trembling just slightly. "What is that number?" One answered. Then the subsystems died all at once. Screens black, thrusters dead. The only sound was our breathing and something else. A low hum rising from the walls, so deep it rattled bone. The agent looked at me, his composure cracking for the first time. "Whatever's down here," he said, "it's awake." And then the floor beneath us began to move. The floor beneath us shifted like muscle under skin. The sub tilted hard to port, and for a second I thought we'd roll. The Oni agent steadied himself with one hand, the other clamped around his sidearm. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the hull, through my teeth, through the marrow in my bones. Then, above us, light split the darkness. At first I thought it was the dome reacting, but it wasn't. It was floodlights, piercing down from the entry corridor we'd passed minutes earlier. Dozens of them, mounted on stealth submersibles, dropping into the chamber like a swarm of mechanical sharks. Their hulls bore no flags, no numbers, but I recognized the design. Black Ops Navy. Tech-classified platforms you only heard about in rumors. They followed us in. Emily breathed, voice trembling. "No," I said. "They were always coming." The agent didn't argue. He keyed his mic, barking orders in clipped phrases. I couldn't catch every word, but I heard enough. Seal, entry, detonation packages, full sterilization, sterilization. My stomach dropped. They weren't here to study this place. They were here to erase it, hand us with it. The first charges detonated near the opening, sending shock waves that rippled through the structure. But the dome didn't fracture like rock. It flexed, absorbed, then pulsed with a blue light so intense. It left after images burning in my eyes. One of the subs fired a shaped charge into the chamber wall. The warhead disintegrated mid-flight, crumbling into a glittering mist before it ever hit. Another tried to deploy a cutting arm. The arm corroded instantly, metal sloughing off like wet clay. "What the hell?" Emily whispered, her camera frozen on the chaos. The agent cursed under his breath and grabbed the cum again. Command, abort breach. That was when it happened. A shape rose from the chamber floor, smooth and immense, like the back of a whale breaking through black water. Except it wasn't an animal and it wasn't a machine. It was both fused into something seamless and wrong. Plates like bone glistened, with a translucent sheen. Vascular lines pulsed beneath its surface, channeling blue light that throbbed in time with the hum filling the chamber. The Oni strike team opened fire. Heavy rounds, nothing stuck. The moment bullets hit its surface, they liquefied and fell like raindrops. Then the thing emitted a sound low at first, then rising into a frequency that made every gauge in our sub-flicker red. I watched weapons corrode in real time. Rifles bloomed with rust, magazines split apart. Even the stealth subs began to blister and peel, their matte black coating dissolving as though acid fog had rolled over them. The agent turned to me, eyes wide for the first time. "It's not defending itself," he said. "It's..." He didn't finish, because the light inside the chamber surged and every system, every screen, every control went black dot in the silence that followed. One thought carved itself into my mind like a scar. We never should have opened the door. Darkness swallowed the chamber, absolute and suffocating. The only light came from the creature roar, whatever it was pulsing in steady waves, casting the sub's interior in ghostly blue. My ears rang from the resonance, a low-frequency hum that wasn't just sound. It was inside me, vibrating through bone, syncing with my heartbeat until I couldn't tell which rhythm was mine. Then the lights came back, not ours. The walls flared alive in patterns, thin streams of luminescence, running like veins, converging toward a spire in the center of the chamber. It hadn't been there before. Or maybe it had been concealed until now. A monolith rising from the floor, 30 feet high, its surface rippling as if it were both metal and flesh. Symbols crawled across it, angular, fractal, shifting when I tried to focus. Emily's voice broke the silence, tight and hoarse. "Alex, those markings I know," I whispered. "I've seen them before. In 2011, they were just fragments etched into the side of an abyssal rock. Wall a discovery Jacob radioed about seconds before Combs died. Seeing them here, complete, made my stomach turn. This wasn't random decoration. It was language. The Oni agent edged closer to the viewport, his face pale. "What is that thing doing?" As if answering him, the spire began to emit pulses of light, short, then long, then grouped in sequences. My mind registered the pattern before I even thought about it. Prime numbers. Emily's camera trembled in her hands. "It's transmitting." I couldn't look away. Each flash carried weight, like meaning pressing against the edge of comprehension. Not just a messenger protocol. And then it hit me. This wasn't communication with us. It was signaling outward, deep into the ocean floor, maybe beyond. I scrambled for the tablet wired into the sub's remaining sensors, praying something still worked. Against all odds, one system flickered alive, a low-band sonar feed. What it showed made my blood run cold. The pulses weren't stopping at the spire. They were propagating through the trench floor, radiating along fault lines like veins lighting up in an X-ray. "This isn't local," I muttered. "It's global." Emily's eyes widened. "You mean every plate system on Earth just got a wake-up call?" The agent swore and grabbed his cum, but the signal was dead. All that filled the sub now was the steady surge of light and the rising hum from the spire. The last pulse hit so hard it rattled our teeth. And then something happened I'll never forget. The trench floor split wide open beneath us, revealing nothing but blackness deeper than any instrument could measure. And in that darkness, something moved. We didn't surface. We were dragged toward upward by an Oni recovery rig that locked onto our crippled sub like a predator hauling prey. By the time the hatch opened, the agent was gone, taken by his own. Emily and I were separated, shoved into different pods for decompression and observation. They flew us out before dawn. When they pulled the blackout hoods off, I wasn't in the Pacific anymore. The stale air and fluorescent hum told me we were underground, probably. A hardened bunker somewhere stateside. A man in a suit waited for me in a concrete room with no windows, no clocks. He slid a tablet across the table. On it, live news feeds. From Tokyo, Santiago, and Jakarta disasters breaking in real time. Quakes, tsunamis, entire coastlines swallowed by walls of water. His voice was calm, almost bored. "Simultaneous seismic events," he said. 7 fault systems triggered within 90 minutes of your little excursion. I stared at the screen. The death toll counters ticked upward in real time, a silent metronome for the end of certainty. "This isn't coincidence," I said, though he hadn't asked. The man smiled faintly. "Of course it isn't. That's why you're here." He tapped the tablet, switching to a classified feed. Thermal overlays of the trench pulsing with impossible heat signatures, spiderwebbing outward beneath every major tectonic plate. And at the center of it all, the spire we'd seen now glowing, like a beacon. "Tell me what it is," he said. I met his gaze and said nothing, because in that moment I realized the truth. They didn't know, not fully. They had power, containment plans, even kill orders, but no understanding of what we'd awakened later. As they escorted me down a corridor lined with steel doors, a fragment of conversation drifted from an open room. Diplomats on a secure line, voices tight with panic. Words like Operation Leviathan. Phrases like, "If they rise, we fall." Emily passed me once in the hall, flanked by guards. Her face was drawn, but her eyes burned. No words, just a look that said everything. They can't stop this. That night, they gave me a cot, a tray of food I didn't touch, and a tablet looping a single image, a bioluminescent swarm rising through the water off Guam, dozens of objects, breaching like whales made of light. The caption read, "Visual confirmed by civilian vessels. Live stream terminated at 2:14 UTC." For the first time since the trench opened, I felt the shape of the end forming. And it wasn't coming from the sky. It was coming from below. They moved me again, different cell, different corridor. The only constant was the sound, the low hum of servers behind the walls, feeding data to someone's war room. I counted hours by the cycles of fluorescent light. On the third day, the door opened and Emily stepped in, escorted by a guard who lingered at the threshold. Her hair was damp, clothes changed, but the fire in her eyes hadn't dimmed. When the door sealed behind him, she whispered fast, "They're cracking, internal divisions. Some want containment, others want to weaponize." I stole 15 minutes. From her jacket, she slid a folded sheet across the table. It was a genetic sequence, dense, precise. "Where did you get this?" I asked. "Trench samples," she said. "Fragments collected from the dome walls." They ran protein chain analysis at Langley. Her voice lowered. "Alex, it matches us." I stared at the rows of letters, unable to process it. "Matches how?" "Neural scaffolding," she said. "These organisms or machines, or whatever they are, they use a protein chain almost identical to the one that regulates human synaptic growth. This isn't just adaptation, it's ancestry." The word lodged in my throat. Ancestry. Emily leaned closer. "You've heard the panspermia theory. Life seeded by extraterrestrial material. What if that's not a theory? What if these things didn't just come here, they made here?" My pulse spiked. Every unanswered question since 2011 snapped into place with horrifying clarity. The pulses, the mimicry, the neurological anomalies in exposed personnel. They weren't conquering us, they were updating us. "Emily, if they engineered us, then what's the end game?" She exhaled, shaky. "I interviewed someone before all this, an abductee. Nobody believed. He said they called it cycle renewal. I thought it was psychosis. Now," she tapped the sequence, "now it looks like protocol." The door lock buzzed. We both froze. 30 seconds left, maybe less. Emily shoved a drive into my palm, encrypted. "It has everything: protein logs, seismic maps, a symbol translation project. One word keeps repeating: engage." The guard reappeared, cutting our time short. As he pulled her out, she glanced back once, eyes sharp with fear and defiance. Hours later, I plugged the drive into the secured tablet. Among the files was an audio note, her voice, whispering like a confession. If we're their experiment, Alex, then maybe extinction events weren't accidents. Maybe they were scheduled. I shut it off, throat tight, because deep down, I knew she was right. The spire's pulses weren't random, they were a countdown, and the clock was no longer ticking. It was roaring by the time they moved me to a secure operations deck. The world outside was already unraveling. Live feeds scrolled across a dozen screens, Arctic ice shelves fracturing in sheets, volcanic plumes rising from the Pacific Ring, ports shuttered under martial law. And threaded through it all were the pulses, low-frequency tremors no seismograph had ever recorded before. They weren't random, they were synchronized. A tech briefing confirmed my worst fear. The energy signatures were amplifying. Each wave originated in the trench and echoed through fault systems like a conductor waking an orchestra. But it wasn't just geology. Satellites showed thermal anomalies bleeding into undersea cable grids. Nuclear subs in the Indian Ocean had gone dark, electronics fried without a trace of heat damage. I stood in the war room, listening to acronyms ricochet off concrete walls. Gridlock, abyss, protocol, continuity chains. It all sounded like Control X. No one was controlling anything. Emily slipped in behind me, flanked by two officers who pretended not to hear as she murmured, "It's worse than they're saying. Those pulses aren't destabilizing the planet by accident. They're mapping it." Her words sank like stones. "Mapping. They're building a lattice," she said. "Stress lines, power grids, neural analogs, like they're preparing Earth for integration, and Oni knows." She passed me a folded sheet under the table, her fingers cold against mine. I unfolded it later in a maintenance corridor, an internal memo stamped red opal. It didn't talk about defense or containment. It talked about leverage, reverse engineering, biostructural tech from the dome, not to stop the entities, but to own them. "Jesus," I whispered to the empty hall. Abyss Protocol was never about preventing emergence. It was a racer first strike patent war fought in the dark. While the world above crumbled at 1807 UTC, the next pulse hit. Every monitor in the ops deck flickered, then went black for exactly 6 minutes. No power, no comms, no heartbeat from the outside world. Just darkness, broken by the distant echo of alarms and the knowledge that, for those 6 minutes, something else had been in control when the systems crawled back online. The first image wasn't ours. It was a live thermal feed of the dome. Its glow had intensified, burning white-hot. Emily appeared in the doorway, her face ashen. "They're not waiting anymore," she said, and for the first time, I believed her. The blackout changed everything. For 6 minutes, global infrastructure flatlined, power grids, satellites, undersea comm lines. In those 6 minutes, something woke up. I felt it like pressure behind my eyes, a weight settling in my skull that didn't leave when the lights returned. They moved us deeper underground that night. The air smelled of copper and recycled fear. The ops deck was a hive of frantic voices, but the language had shifted. No more talk of containment or mitigation. Now it was activation windows, failover protocols, and one phrase that kept surfacing like oil. Operation Leviathan. Emily found me by the water reclamation tanks, her hair damp, her eyes sharp. "It's an arc," she said without preamble. I frowned. "What?" "The dome. It's not a base or a fortress. It's a living arc, dormant until the cycle resets." She shoved a tablet into my hands. On it, a timeline scrolled backward. Through epochs, extinction events plotted against geomagnetic shifts and trench resonance patterns. Every spike lined up, every single one. 65 million years ago, dinosaurs vanish. 11,000 years ago, younger Dryas freeze, each followed by a deep-sea pulse, identical to what we'd recorded last week. They've done this before, Emily whispered, every time Earth gets overwritten. The words settled like lead in my gut. Overwritten, not destroyed, reformatted. They're not invaders, she said. They're custodians, resetting the biosphere for something new, something like us, I muttered, recalling the protein sequences burned into my mind. A shiver crawled up my spine. So what happens to us now? Emily didn't answer. She didn't need to. That night, they called me into a briefing. The ONI director laid out their plan with clinical calm. Operation Leviathan. 12 thermonuclear devices tethered to autonomous subs, aimed at the trench. Detonate, collapse the dome, seal the fault network under millions of tons of debris. I stared at the red schematics glowing on the wall. You do that, you destabilize the Pacific Plate, I said. You trigger a collapse event. Cascading quakes, tsunamis, billions dead. The director didn't blink. Billions, or all. Choose your math. In that moment, something inside me cracked, not from fear, but from the crushing weight of inevitability. We weren't debating strategy. We were clawing for relevance in a system that had outlived us by eons. Hours later, alone in my quarters, I opened Emily's last file on the encrypted drive. It wasn't data this time. It was audio, a single deep sonar ping echoing across. The spectrum, impossibly loud, impossibly far-reaching, and as it reverberated through the speakers, I knew it wasn't just sound. It was a signal, a call, and millions of us had already heard it in our sleep. The countdown wasn't on any clock, but everyone in that bunker felt it ticking. You could see it in their movements, faster, sharper, like the air itself had grown thinner. Operation Leviathan had gone green. 12 nukes prepped for deployment. Launch windows aligned. I sat in the briefing room under fluorescent lights. That buzzed like dying insects, staring at the mission schematic. Each detonation plotted along the trench rim, an attempt to cave it in like snapping shut a wound. But even on paper, the plan bled futility. You don't bury an ocean dot. Emily slid into the seat beside me, her voice low. They think fire will solve it. It won't. They don't care, I said. They just need the illusion of control. She hesitated, then pushed a folder under the table. Inside were only transcripts, internal chatter scraped by someone with access and no conscience. A phrase repeated like a drumbeat. Phase 2, tech acquisition. My stomach turned. They don't believe Leviathan will work. They don't want it to, Emily said. The nukes aren't the plan. They're the distraction. Before I could respond, alarms shattered the room's stale calm. A screen dropped from the ceiling, flashing a live news feed, not classified, not censored. Civilian footage streaming from the Philippine Sea. A freighter's deck camera shook violently as something breached the surface less than 200 meters away. For a moment, all I saw was water exploding skyward like a detonation. Then the shape rose, pale, curved, glistening in the stormlight, a structure the size of a cathedral, lifting on columns that weren't legs but something stranger. Veined with blue light, it pulsed like the dome we'd seen, alive and deliberate. Voices erupted across the ops deck. Words like confirmation, containment, information, blackout. But it was too late. The live stream had already gone viral. Watching in real time as the first of them broke the surface during a typhoon that now looked less like weather and more like cover. Emily's hand gripped, my arm hard enough to hurt. They're moving up the chain, Alex. The spire's signal, it wasn't just a call, it was a trigger. On the big screen, the object flexed, plates shifting like a living reef. Then it slid back into the depths, leaving nothing but foam and silence. A general barked orders to cut civilian feeds, but the genie was out. Global panic would follow within the hour. That night, as Oni prepped the nukes for Leviathan, I sat in a dim corridor, Emily beside me, both of us staring at the cold concrete floor. If this is a reset, she whispered, maybe they're not destroying the world. I looked at her. Then what? She met my eyes. They're replacing it. We descended for the last time under a sky the color of gunmetal. Leviathan was in motion 12 warheads tethered to autonomous drones, each programmed for simultaneous detonation at the trench rim. Oni didn't invite me aboard. They ordered me, flanked by men whose eyes never blinked. Emily came too, shackled. By necessity, her camera confiscated, but her mind sharp as ever. The carrier that ferried us was a floating city of classified steel. Inside its command deck, I saw the mission clock counting down in sickly red digits. For hours, 57 minutes and 32 seconds. Beneath it, a schematic of the Pacific lit up like a wound. They strapped us into the sub again. A military-grade Leviathan-class descent pod, bristling. With tech that didn't exist 2 years ago, adaptive hull plates, neural feedback controls. It wasn't built for observation. It was built for war. The Oni commander sat across from us, his expression a slab of granite. If the Ark breaches surface scale, he said, we lose atmospheric control. That's game over for everyone. The ocean swallowed us in silence, broken only by the pod's steady thrumming. As we dropped past 20,000 feet, I felt it again, that hum, threading through the water like a pulse from the Earth's marrow. Stronger now, faster. At 34,000 feet, the abyss opened ahead, and there it was, the dome, brighter than before, throbbing like a living star, and beside it, the spirit's surface alive with symbols, no longer shifting but fixed in hard, symmetrical order, a language that had stopped asking and started commanding. Charges deployed, the commander said into his mic. His voice was calm, but his knuckles were white against the harness. Then the spire moved, not physically, but with light-lancing beams that pierced the dark and struck something above the trench. I stared at the display as patterns bloomed. Across the Pacific grid, arcs connecting nodes thousands of miles apart. Emily gripped my arm. It's a map, she whispered, not of Earth dovedom, a network. This isn't the Endit's alignment. The pod lurched violently. Systems blinked red. On the exterior cams, I saw the Ark rise in immense form, slipping free of the trench, trailing streams of light like bioluminescent veins. The nukes armed in sequence, their status bars bleeding toward zero. The commander turned to me, shouting over alarms. You know the code. Your team cracked fragments in 2011. Use it, disable the spire, or we fire. I stared at the control. Array, heart pounding. He was right. Those fragments weren't gibberish. They were keys. Emily leaned in, her breath hot against my ear. If you trigger that blast, you collapse the Pacific plate. 2 billion dead in 24 hours. And if I don't, I asked, Her eyes were wet but unflinching. Then pray they want us alive. I entered the sequence, fingers trembling. The spire pulsed once twice, then erupted in a beam that tore through black water, projecting a galactic map into the void, and in its center, Earth small, pulsing like a cell awaiting division. The commander's headset crackled with a final transmission, its signaling something inbound. The beam pierced the ocean and climbed into the sky like a needle of light, stabbing through miles of water, clouds, and atmosphere. Every instrument in the pod went wild compasses, spinning, readings bleeding nonsense. The commander was shouting into a dead calm, demanding abort protocols. But the ocean didn't care about our noise. Then the pod shook, hard enough to rattle my teeth. I thought it was a quake until Emily pointed upward, through the viewport, far above the fractured shimmer of the surface. The darkness bloomed red. At first, I thought it was fire. Then the shape resolved a structure hanging in low orbit, massive enough to eclipse stars. It wasn't a ship in any sense we understand. It looked like architecture, a lattice of bone and light forming a ring. So vast it hurt to comprehend. It answered, Emily whispered. The only commander went pale. Surface breach confirmed, a synthetic voice intoned from the failing comes. Execute Leviathan now. No. I lunged for the control board. If those warheads detonated, the Pacific Plate would cascade into a global kill zone. But the system was already locked out, override codes bleeding across the screen. The timer hit 60 seconds. Emily grabbed my hand and jammed the encryption. Moduled the one from her stolen drive into the auxiliary port. You said it was a language, she said, breathless, so speak. I keyed in the fragments I'd memorized from the spire. My fingers shook so hard I thought I'd miskey every stroke. The timer bled down, 0:21, 0:14, 0:07, and then splunts. The countdown froze. For one heartbeat, I thought I'd failed. Then the spire flared white, and every warhead disarmed in unison. The commander's scream was pure fury. You just doomed the species. But I wasn't listening. Because in that same moment, the spire shifted its beam not outward, but downward. Toward us the light wasn't heat. It was pressure, dense and soft all at once, flooding the pod like water without weight. My thoughts blurred, unraveling into colors and shapes I couldn't name. In that kaleidoscope, something in words, but in patterns, so precise they felt inevitable. It wasn't a threat. It was an invitation. Emily's hand slipped into mine. Her voice was a whisper fading into the hum. Cycle renewal. It's not extinction. It's a transition. When I woke, I wasn't in the pod. I wasn't sure I was anywhere at all. Just a single terminal screen in the dark, pulsing with the last message I ever saw. They were here before us. They'll be here after. Weeks later, a CT relay in Chile picked up a new signal, same frequency as the trench. Pulses, but this time it came from Europa. And then the channel went dead.